what he called in Latin res extensa. So, for example, Descartes believed that the universe and the space in between celestial bodies was filled with a subtle, invisible, ethereal matter, and that planetary motions could be explained as vortices in the ether. So the idea that there could be an empty space was an absurdity at the time. The first evidence for a vacuum came in 1644, where the Italian scientist Evangelista Torricelli observed an interesting new phenomenon. He observed that if you have a glass tube sealed on one end and filled with mercury, and you invert the glass tube on a plate filled with mercury, the mercury in the column would descend because of atmospheric pressure, leaving a small space on the top of the tube. So the question was, what was the space? Was the empty space, as Torricelli speculated, or not? And a debate began between the so-called planists and the vacuists. So the
planists, that there was four vacuists.
That's right. So the planists were the defenders of Descartes. They said that space couldn't possibly be an empty space, so it must have been filled with either rarefied air or spirits of mercury. And the vacuists that claimed effectively that was an empty space. So Pascal came along because he heard from Mersenne about Torricelli's experiment. Mersenne witnessed Torricelli's experiment in Florence and so spread the news in France. And in between 1646 and 47, he set on to repeat Torricelli's experiment with an eye to refuting the Cartesian orthodoxy.
And in the terms of the time, he did. And Boyle, because he was a sort of, as David Wootton has written, he was a transmitter, Pascal, from the French Enlightenment to the British Enlightenment. Boyle, was he son of the Earl of Cork and father of chemistry? He credited Pascal mightily for this vacuum and went on with his own experiments based on that. So we have that there as well.
That's right. Yeah. So Pascal
is about 7 programs, Pascal. But we must move on. David, he took this on. Let's talk about Pascal now in terms of the area that Mikhail has been talking about. He pushed this on into his study of gases.
Yes, I mean, what Pascal did first, let's stick with the vacuum for a moment. Pascal does 3 extraordinary experiments with the vacuum. First of all, he's the first person to repeat Torricelli's experiment and to show what happens when you do it. He does it in various forms. He does it with mercury, as Torricelli had done it, where you get a tube which has to be more than 27 inches high. He also does it with red wine, where you have to have a tube that's more than 32 foot high and you get this space at the top. And he does this in public. People gather around to see this extraordinary phenomenon because it's something that's supposed to be impossible to do. And Galileo had said you ought to be able to do it. Here's Pascal doing it in public and showing it can be done. He then goes on to devise this extraordinary experiment where you take a tube of mercury and carry it up a mountain. And as you carry it up in the mountain, the level of the mercury in the tube falls. This is what we call a barometer. And what he's arguing here is that what's supporting the level of mercury in the tube is the weight of the air. That effectively the barometer is a balance, a weighing machine. And as you go up, there's less air pressing down on the mercury, and consequently the level drops. And this becomes a decisive evidence for the fact that we're all living under an ocean of air which is pressing down on us all the time. No one had shown that before. So he not only proves the existence of the vacuum, he claims he's proved the existence of the vacuum. Descartes' never convinced, but still, he thinks he has. He also proves that we're living under the constant air pressure, and this is what's being measured by the mercury. So there's a series of brilliant experiments like that. Then what he also does is he works on water pressure. He thinks he's invented, actually Galileo had done this before, but Pascal doesn't know this. He invents the hydraulic press, where you take a pressure at one end and magnify it by passing it through liquids. And he shows what the theory of this is with what's called the barrel experiment, where he takes a barrel of water and he puts a tall tube into it and fills the tube with water. And the height of the tube is crucial in determining the pressure that feeds down into the barrel. And if you have a tube that's 20 feet high and put very thin tube, put water in it, it'll burst the barrel through the pressure that it's created. So he's demonstrating the working of pressures in liquids.
So he opened up, developed, went forward with an enormous field which had consequences which have rolled through the last 2 or 3 centuries.
Absolutely. I mean, he's the first. People have done experiments before. Pascal is the first person to do experiments that get attention and that people think transform the nature of knowledge.
Can I turn to you, Michael Moriarty, on this? Because, as David said, this is a transforming thing. And he didn't do it alone, but he did it most dramatically and most, for the purposes of this programme, most importantly. His approach to science compared to the approach...